They called her a queen. Some called her a goddess. At dusk, the ruined stones of Taposiris Magna exhale the heat of 1,000 summers, and the wind carries a whisper that sounds suspiciously like a plan. Sand lifts from the foundations as a team bends to the earth. Fingers scrape brittle pottery, the corner of a carved lintel, letters in 2 tongues, Greek and Egyptian, glinting where the sun finds them. At the center of this site, where a temple honors Osiris, Dr. Kathleen Martinez has spent decades pursuing the same conviction. The area may conceal not only a royal burial, but traces of something far more deliberate, a hidden program of secrecy that blurs the line between ritual and strategy. She says plainly, "The tomb may speak to more than reverence." That sentence is not a verdict. It is the shove that sends the shovel deeper. The sequence of discoveries reads like a script written for suspense. First, the temple facade, its reliefs fingering a narrative of divinity and kingship. Then bilingual inscriptions that explicitly link a royal figure with Isis, language that casts the queen as both sovereign and living embodiment of a goddess. Next, the maps and scans reveal a tunnel, carved into bedrock and stretching an astonishing distance, 1,300 meters of stone passage bending away from the temple's inner sanctum. Deeper still, in a carefully sealed chamber, technicians lift a lid to reveal a black sarcophagus. Inside lie 2 heat-sealed bodies and a sealed bronze cylinder. And off to one side, an antechamber, a circular shrine where 36 skulls lie arranged as if set by a meticulous hand. Each find raises a new question. Each piece offers a plausible, layered function. Taken together, they invite a hypothesis that is both dark and, insistently, only a hypothesis. If you love mysteries from the ancient world, subscribe to Follow the Dig. This is exactly the kind of place where answers come slowly and certainty is never comfortable. Stay with us, we are only beginning. The temple at Taposiris Magna was never merely stone and mortar. It was a stage for political theology. The bilingual inscriptions are a deliberate performance. Greek script addressing the Hellenistic world, Egyptian hieroglyphs addressing a native population. They proclaim continuity with a divine office, Isis's living representative, which is to say they advertise both sanctity and sovereignty. For Cleopatra VII, the idea of ruling as Isis incarnate was political theater and protective theology rolled into one. Inscribing that identity on temple walls is not a private thought, it is a public assertion of divine authority. Beneath that assertion lies the tunnel. It is not a casual corridor. Engineers who examine the surveys describe a passage that alternates narrow squeezes and small chambers, hewn into bedrock with an expertise that suggests planning and purpose.
There are thresholds where blocks have been fitted like stoppers, and a series of offsets that could conceal sightlines. Ground-penetrating radar and magnetometry reveal anomalies along its course, voids that punctuate the tunnel, chambers that do not appear on the surface plan. The practical questions multiply. Who could build such a passage? For what use? And crucially, why beneath a temple of Osiris? Archaeology supplies facts. Interpretation supplies a story. The facts here are concrete. The tunnel's length, approximately 1,300 meters. Its construction required sustained labor and knowledge of rock cutting. The tunnel connects to spaces that are ritually marked and architecturally sophisticated. Radiocarbon tests and detailed stratigraphy are still pending to pin down precise dates for every element. The sequence of construction and whether all the features were contemporaneous remains a primary question the team is testing. When the lid of the black sarcophagus was eased aside, the light ran across a polished surface like a bruise. Inside, 2 interred figures lay in a posture that suggested intentional sealing. Resins, or heating, that produced what the team describes as heat-sealed enclosures. Between them, nestled and locked in place, sat a bronze cylinder shut fast against time. The cylinder's metalwork is unlike routine funerary gear. It is compact and cold, its seal intact. Archaeologists handle it with the care afforded to objects that might alter theory. Nearby, the circular antechamber arrests the eye. 36 skulls, cleaned of their soft tissues long ago, lie arranged in a perfect ring, each cradled in a shallow niche. Blue lotus pollen and traces of gold dust stain the stone. Votive paraphernalia sits like residue from a paused rite. An inscription nearby, translated for the team, speaks in guarded language about guardians of the passage and maintaining balance. That phraseology, read beside the skull array, does not read like casual decoration. It reads like a programmatic assertion. Here be guardians. But guardians of what? A tomb? Certainly. A passage, perhaps. A weaponized secret? That is the move from fact to hypothesis, and it must be visible as such. To understand why some researchers are willing to sketch a darker design, we have to re-enter history's political theater. Cleopatra VII operated in a world where legitimacy hinged on more than lineage. It hinged on allegiance, image, and control. Rome's military shadow loomed large over the eastern Mediterranean in the 1st century BCE. Julius Caesar's campaigns had left Roman detachments in Egypt. The later presence of Roman legions and commanders meant that Egypt's sovereignty was continually negotiated amid military threat and political entanglement. Cleopatra's personal alliances with Julius Caesar and later Mark Antony were power moves, but also survival strategies.
In a landscape where allegiances could turn, rulers sometimes took preemptive measures, private enough to evade a public record. There is a compelling, if unproven, logic to imagine an infrastructure designed for clandestine action. One possible scenario, carefully framed as a reconstruction, not a certainty, maps how these architectural features might function in a hostile political context. Imagine a narrow team, vetted and sworn to secrecy, using the tunnel to move unseen from the sanctuary into a position beneath or behind a defended perimeter. The thresholds carved into the passage could serve as temporary barricades or concealment points. Offsets in chambers could house signals, stockpiles, or men ready to spring. The black sarcophagus, placed within a side chamber and bearing the sealed cylinder, could have doubled as a concealed control room, a symbolic funeral facade masking a logistical node. The skull chamber, visible to anyone who found it, would have been a monument capable of terrifying or ritualizing the outcome of an operation, a psychological device as much as a cultic deposit. This reconstruction rests on steps that must be checked against material reality. For the plan to work, the tunnel would have to reach positions of tactical value relative to Roman encampments. Entrances and exits would need to be concealed, and the timing of the operation would require coordinated access and knowledge of Roman dispositions. None of these elements are proven. We do not yet have a map that links the tunnel's terminus to a known Roman camp, nor do we have written orders, eyewitness testimony, or a contemporaneous chronicler describing such an assault. What the site provides are the physical enablers of secrecy, and that is the only legitimate bridge from architectural possibility to possible political purpose. Experts who study the site offer starkly different framings. Dr. Kathleen Martinez, whose work has animated the search for royal burials around Alexandria, frames the discoveries as an accumulation of suggestive evidence. These are not random deposits, she has said. They show design, they show intention. Her conviction is an engine for excavation, it is not a court of law. Other archaeologists urge caution. The arrangement of human remains in ritual context is common in Egyptian religion, where ancestor veneration, votive deposits, and symbolic substitutions often produce deposits that can look alarming to a modern eye. The number 36, for example, carries cultural echoes. Ancient Egyptian calendars and cosmologies used decans and other groupings that could map onto ritual numerology. Some specialists argue the skull ring could be votive offerings for protection in the afterlife, or a symbolic army of guardians intended to assist a soul's journey. Even the bronze cylinder resists tidy interpretation. In funerary assemblages, sealed vessels sometimes contain scrolls, pigments, oils, or ritual texts.
They can be symbolic keys for the dead. Other possibilities include storage for sacred objects or even mechanical parts, though no inscription or internal examination so far permits a definitive reading. The team will need to subject that cylinder to non-invasive scanning, metallurgical analysis, and, if conservation allows, careful opening under controlled conditions. Until those tests and radiocarbon dates are complete, the cylinder remains a sealed proposition. There is also a socio-cultural argument against weaponizing ritual spaces. Temples, by their nature, were places of community memory and sacred obligation. Their sanctity afforded them a protective status that could deter enemies and settle disputes via ritual means rather than violence. Some scholars propose that what looks like secrecy may have been protection, concealed caches, graves placed out of sight to preserve sacred materials, or architectural accretions made to safeguard cultic treasures. In that reading, the tunnel is a storage corridor, the sarcophagus a secondary burial, and the skull ring a votive deposit, less a blueprint for ambush than a map of cultic practice. If we allow for the darker hypothesis while keeping its provisional status explicit, we can sketch the operational logic of an ambush without asserting that it occurred. Step 1. Concealment. Move personnel and equipment through a tunnel that avoids watched roads and courtyards. Step 2. Insertion. Position a strike team to access a structural weak point in a camp or a strategic gate.
Step 3. Disruption. Use surprise in confined spaces to create chaos, perhaps by collapsing a gate, redirecting defenders, or severing command lines. Step 4. Terror. Stage a ritual display to confuse and demoralize, the skull ring and gold dust serving as an intended image to break morale or assert mystical advantage. Each step corresponds to tangible features of Taposiris. Cut thresholds and offsets correspond to concealment and insertion. The sarcophagus and cylinder could mark logistical control. The skull chamber supplies theatrical terror. Again, each correspondence is circumstantial, not conclusive. Counterarguments are immediate and forceful. A military operation requires resupply, concealment over time, and a political aftermath. If such an operation had been carried out against a Roman force or a Caesar's legion in the period when Roman troops were present, there might be contemporary reactions recorded in Roman or Egyptian texts, or later accounts alluding to sudden massacres or disappeared cohorts. The absence of clear textual corroboration makes any violent interpretation suspect. Additionally, the engineering expertise demonstrated in the tunnel might have been intended to protect valuable cult items during periods of unrest, not to enable assault. The sarcophagus might contain priests or high-ranking cult functionaries, rather than soldiers or conspirators.
The skulls might represent ancestors, martyrs, or symbolic guardians. Each alternative is plausible, and plausibility matters in archaeology because it is the guardrail against sensationalism. The excavation team is painfully aware of these limits. "We must not let desire for a headline leap past method," says one senior conservator working on site. The team has cataloged every find, run magnetometry profiles, and prepared to subject samples to radiocarbon dating and isotopic analysis. Those tests will anchor the sequence of construction and perhaps reveal whether features are contemporaneous or belong to different phases of the site's long life. If the skulls post-date the tunnel by centuries, for example, the military hypothesis collapses at a stroke. Conversely, if dates align and the cylinder contains materials consistent with a coordinated operation, the hypothesis gains traction, but still requires caution. Beyond the lab work, context matters. Cleopatra's life and reign were theater. She used image as policy. To imagine her as an architect of an ambush is to read her political rationality in a certain light. She was shrewd, daring, and willing to use personal partnerships with Rome to her advantage. But to move from possibility to assertion requires evidence that is not yet in hand. The archaeological record here is suggestive. It is emphatic in its oddity, but not definitive in its verdict. Which brings us to the most dramatic unresolved element, the sealed bronze cylinder, and a persistent magnetic anomaly beyond the sarcophagus. Non-invasive scans pick up a disturbance in the rock, a field that suggests a void or a composition change beneath a secondary wall. The cylinder sits like a key in a lock no one has turned. It is the object that promises to be the most decisive hinge in the story. If it contains inscriptions or implements that reference tactical functions, or if it holds records of an operation, the implications would be enormous. If it contains ritual texts or offerings, the implications are different, but still revealing about how power, religion, and secrecy interwove in Cleopatra's Egypt. For now, the cylinder remains sealed, the anomaly persists, and the skulls circle their silence. The site yields its fragments in measured drips. Each sample tested, each lumen of light shown into a chamber will push the narrative toward clarity or toward ever more intriguing ambiguity. What, finally, can we say about the title that brought you here? The idea of an assassin's queen plotting to wipe out Caesar's Roman legion. The title frames a possible thread, and the site supplies materials that make that thread imaginable. But archaeological method demands that imagination be tethered to evidence. The tunnel, the sarcophagus, the cylinder, and the skulls together form a dossier of possibilities. They could indicate a clandestine operation, a funerary program with dramatic symbolism, a protective storage system, or some combination of these functions across different epochs. At present, the hypothesis that a royal program intended to strike at a Roman military presence is one plausible narrative among several, not a settled fact. The Earth keeps its balance between revelation and silence. The excavation will continue. Samples will be dated, the cylinder scanned, and more context may emerge from comparative studies of contemporary sites. There is a risk, always, that the appetite for sensational stories will